Day. We are delighted that so many of you have joined us from across geographies and time zones to talk about a topic that is of increasing importance in our world: how banks can meet the needs of people and planet, how banks can be a force for good. Our topic this year for our Banking on Values Day is real impact behind big words. And that's the conversation we're going to have today with three leaders of institutions that are delivering real impact as banks, as financial institutions, each and every day. Joining me in conversation today will be Priscilla Sims-Brown, CEO of Amalgamated Bank, Damien Walsh, CEO of Bank Australia, and Selim Hussain, CEO of BRAC Bank. Before we get into conversation and really talk about the specifics and the actions of what does it mean to be a values-based bank, what are the examples, and how do we encourage more financial institutions to deliver products and services that meet the needs of people and planet, we're going to show a short video that gives you a little bit more information about Banking on Values Day. So please show the video.
Words. They're so flexible. You can stretch them or shrink them. You can mold them, play with them, even mangle them till they can lose their original meaning. Banks like to use big words. But words do mean things, real things. They describe the reality. For Banking on Values Day 2022, we're looking behind the big words. 8 words that represent the values of our movement. Ambitious, systemic, intentional, transparent, coherent, contextual, inclusive, authentic. Discover the real impact behind the big words. Banking on Values.
Super. So as the video suggests, we really want to push beyond the words. We want to talk about the actions and the actions that deliver real impact for people and for real people in the real economy. So to kick us off and to kind of warm us up, I would say, in conversation, Damien, I'm going to invite you, each of you, but I'm going to start with you. Share with us an example of how values-based banking works in action in delivering real impact for people in your communities.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Laurie. I think for us, in terms of building out a values-based bank and competing on values, competing on purpose, we really wanted to be authentic and transparent and intentional about who we were as an organisation. So one of the things that we did, back in the early days, was actually acquire some land to place into a covenant, so that it was protected land that we could build a conservation reserve. And today that's over 2,000 hectares of land. And it's where we work with environmental organisations to conserve and protect the land, but also engage with the local First Nations people about integrating traditional land management with Western science. So it's that intersection of social and environmental justice, which is a great example for our organisation.
It's a terrific example. Thank you for sharing that. And the integration of social and environmental, and also highly contextual, but really what is needed in that place and how you're bringing various members of the community together around that initiative. And also I would just highlight putting the bank's capital to work in a different way than we sometimes think of banks making loans, but you're actually putting your investment capital to work in that initiative as well. Thank you. Great to kick us off. Priscilla, I'm going to turn to you. Can you share with us an example?
Sure. I just want to say I love that example too. I mean, using your balance sheet to do good is wonderful. That's really what this is about, isn't it? Look, for us, it's really the integration of many things as well. It's the intersection of many things as well. And so one example I can think of is in West Virginia, which is an area where there's a fair number of sort of low to moderate income households. Excuse me. And we have a project there called Solar Holler. Solar Hauler is what it sounds like. It's a company that does solar panels. But it's particularly interesting because unlike many companies in their business, they happen to employ union workers. That fits real nicely in our with one of our principles around workers' rights and making sure that that's being respected. Of course, being so of ours, but we have a number of projects like that. We focus on 6 segments. Our customers are in those segments, and our customers are change makers who focus on progressive ideas.
That's also a really fantastic example because what you're teasing out, it's not just what the company is doing, what activity, it's how they do it. And so I just think it's a really great probing beyond just, yes, okay, there's a product, there's a service, but how are they really doing that?
Exactly.
And that's so important.
Exactly. A values-based bank is to make sure organizations that are operating with values as well.
That goes again to the notion of community engagement, authenticity, intentionality, really pulling it through, and then transparently looking inside the company to see what's happening there. Fantastic example. Thank you so much. And Selim, how about you? Could you give us an example of real impact at work at BRAC Bank?
Let me do this slightly differently. Both Priscilla and Damien have spoken about what they are doing. So I think values-based banking is also about what one is not going to do. For example, we don't do tobacco in Bangladesh. Tobacco is very, very profitable, both for the farmer. We do not involve ourselves with that at that level. We do not finance farming. We do not finance the tobacco cigarette makers either, although that business too is enormous in this country with very, very large multinationals operating in that sector. We don't do it because we feel it's not socially responsible. We do not want to finance the selling of cancer. So we stay away from tobacco, although it is legal and it is very, very profitable. Similarly, there's another business in this country. We call it shipbreaking. It is for the which imports the ship, and for the sponsors who then sell all the scrap to the re-rolling mills. We stay away from that business. It's very profitable. We don't do it. So to me, values-based banking is also about making a choice, as Priscilla and Damien said, being authentic, being transparent, and being very clear-cut about what we're not going to do. And I think those 2 examples will give you a sense of what we mean by ethical banking as well.
It's fantastic, Selim. I'm glad you brought this up early in our conversation, because a little bit later we're going to talk about some of the growing concerns and debate in the broader community, greenwashing, impact washing. COP27 is going on right now, and there's been a lot of commentary about that. And the word you used that I thought was so powerful just now was choice. Yes, you are a regulated financial, each of you in your own markets, regulated financial institution. You have shareholders, you have expectations of financial performance. You are making choices about the kinds of businesses you want to support, how you will do that. And you're making those choices deliberately, with intention, with clarity, with transparency. And sometimes that does mean refraining from something that others might be doing, and that it can be quite lucrative in the near term in one dimension only, but you don't look at your businesses in one dimension. You're solving for the needs of people and planet, and that's your driving orientation. So thank you for introducing that early in our conversation. So you've heard 3 great examples, or examples from 3 terrific financial institutions in very different geographies, right? So we have Australia, North America, we have Bangladesh, where we happen to be today, which is amazing and wonderful. And there's a common thread. So across your geographies, there's a common thread that's just come through in the conversation. And of course, that's why we're all together as part of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. So zooming out to that community perspective of the GABV, Priscilla, I'm going to start with you on this one. The GABV has been in existence since 2009, so more than a decade now, 13 years. There's a growing community of banks across the globe. What would you highlight as a couple of achievements of the group, the growing community of values-based banks when you look at it at a community level?
Well, I'm probably the newbie in GABV in this panel, but I'm going to take a stab at this because I've just spent several glorious days with colleagues from all over the world, literally from every continent sitting in front of us. And I think one of the most amazing things that happens in this environment is learning about our differences and learning about our commonness and being surrounded in an organization of people who share values, share some of the same struggles. You know, we all have the same macroeconomic issues, but we have very different ways those issues are being addressed and and very different ways we're dealing with them in our own markets. So I think the very best thing that GABV does for this community is help this community find like-minded peers to advance the work that we all want to do. Now that's not to mention some very hard real metrics that I bet if we sat down and sort of took stock of, we would see that we're really advancing the impact not only that we have directly, but the influence we as a community have on others, including peer banks in our own countries, to do better. And we'll talk more about other banks later, but the idea that by our very existence and by having these conversations and by spending a day-to-day focused on what it means to be socially responsible, what it means to be banking on values, by taking a day just to really consider that, we are impacting and having influence on others, giving other people the chance to do so as well.
I think that's fantastic and beautifully expressed. Thank you for sharing that. And I, having been part of the community really since inception, it just resonates so much with me what you've said. And I think there is such a glorious connectivity that's been established across all of these amazing geographies, jurisdictions, legal and regulatory regimes, locally specific contexts, and yet we come together and there is so much commonality in how we are looking at the opportunities as well as the challenges in each of our markets, and talking about that, how we do it each and every day, day in, day out. So thank you for that. Damien, how about you? When you look at the community of values-based banks, what do you think are a couple of the achievements of the movement?
So a couple of thoughts there, and one will totally agree. I think the idea about these organisations finance change, but we also need to change finance. So one of the objectives of the Alliance is to influence the broader financial system, both domestically and internationally. And I think that the Alliance and the member banks of the Alliance are doing a really good job of influencing both in their domestic economies, the way they engage with their peer groups, banks. I would like to reflect upon is board stream to come together and share ideas, to collaborate, to challenge, and do that in a space where we're not competitors. So we can actually do things that in this environment that we can't do in other forums, that we can't do in other domestic, associations or groupings. So it's actually a very unique alliance. So credit to the founding fathers and mothers that brought the association together. But I think that space for leaders to take time out of their day to reflect on how they're impactful in their business, how they can deliver real meaningful outcomes, and about putting finance to service for people on the planet is very special.
Fantastic. So, and there's very active cross learnings. You've given some specific examples of that, which is terrific. And I really appreciate your use of the word influence, but influence for what? For more impact, it's not influence for the sake of recognition. It's influence for meeting the needs of people and planet in our markets, and then hoping to work with each other to do even more of that. I think that's a really effective way of expressing it. And you do it by doing yourselves, but also working with others, and also working with other actors who are new and newer to values-based banking. Because I think the one point I would just share, Damien, from your in your comments, is that there are a number of banks who are at different stages of the journey of values-based banking. And I think as a community, we've been both inclusive of that and really collaborative in helping one another move along that journey. And I think that's really important. Thank you so much. Selim, how about you? When you look at the movement, what would you point to as a couple of achievements?
Although BRAC Bank was one of the founding members of the GABV, I myself, I've been around for about 7 years now. And I remember the first annual meeting I was invited to. It was I think it was in Amsterdam, 2016. And when I got the invitation, I went to our chairperson, Sir Fazli Hassan Abed, and I asked him, what is this all about? I mean, I need to understand this before I go there. And he looked at me and he said, I want you to just go and learn and then come back and tell me. It was incredible. So I came to this place. I didn't know anything about values-based banking. And that's where my journey started. So the GABV for me it's given, at least me personally, and also the institution I work in, BRAC Bank, it's given us direction. It's like a North Star, like a compass in many ways. And many things that some of us have wanted to do historically, maybe small ideas that we may have come to fruition because the GABV has provided us with structure, with discipline, and even analytics. For example, the scorecard that we have, it helps guide you into what kinds of business you should be doing and what you should not. And of course, when you come and meet people across, at every meeting, there are enormous learnings. Just talking to people, listening to each other. And these forums at the GABV are unlike normal banking conferences because people share, people open up. I think somebody said that half an hour ago. I have been to other banking conferences where everybody is very careful about what they say so they don't, let on trade secrets. But we do not have that here. It's a culture of openness, of learning, and so to me, I have personally gained an enormous amount, a lot by being part of the. Would like to think that through the GABV, I have been able to help BRAC Bank also move forward in this space.
And what you're sharing in that reflection, Selim, and thank you for sharing your personal introduction to the community as well, is that you're living the values as you interact with your colleagues. So that authenticity, that transparency, what you're bringing, the openness, which isn't always the case when you're meeting colleagues for the first time. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that I wanted to just tease out, my observation as well, is I think the community has really evolved in how to explain and for examples, and you're living examples of that and growing it, which is fantastic. There's no impact behind big words, but also to people for whom this is a newer concept, to be able to explain it. And the Alliance has put together the principles, the scorecard, analytics, research, and understand better. And I think that's been a really important contribution. Question. Language that we've been using for quite some time has now become mainstream. You can't pick up a newspaper today, Financial Times, New York Times, the Dhaka Times, and there you have it. Our language is right there. And so my question, I want you to each take a turn with this, and maybe Selim, on this one, I will start with you, is how do you think about the differentiation? And it's different how they're doing. So what are some of the points of differentiation of values-based banking for you?
It's the type of business we do. What kind of business do we do? What kind of business do other banks, whatever, other so-called value-based banks do? And there's clearly a difference, the way we behave with our clients, the way we support our clients during times of stress. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think it's a question of just putting up advertising, using certain words and terms in advertising, and for banks to expect their clients, the public to, sort of accept all that. Actually, people don't, at least not in our country, where people understand what each institution stands for, which is a purely for profit organization, and which is an organization or a bank which which has values and also works for shareholder return together. So I think sometimes these financial institutions who put up these fancy advertisements and promotions on television, et cetera, they think they're actually able to hoodwink the public. I don't think that happens all that much, actually, because the public understands.
So I think that I think the public is very smart. I think that's absolutely, that's a great observation. I really like your reference, though. One example going through this pandemic, which we all experienced, no matter where we were sitting in the world, is that you stayed with people. You stayed with people. You actually leaned into community. You extended support and service to people who were in need at a very difficult time. And there wasn't a debate about it. That was the decision out of the gate. And there's many examples within the Global Alliance and values-based community where from the board to management to every employee in that organization knew that was how we respond in moments of stress in communities. So thank you for that. Priscilla, please jump in.
I actually want to jump in and embarrass both of my colleagues, because I saw examples of the differentiation just in their activities. So yesterday, all of us who are members of the GABV here in Dhaka went on learning journeys. And for anyone listening that doesn't know what a learning journey is, that's where you get in buses and you go to the client companies of the bank that is hosting the meeting. And in this case, we went to the Dhaka, we went around Dhaka to the clients of BRAC. And one of them that we went to, and these are both examples around COVID, one of them that we went to was an incredible woman who started first as receiving a microloan. I won't say names, but receiving a microloan, very small loan, as she was a seamstress starting her own business. Now, 20 years later, she employs 200 people in her factory. She also employs 200 women at home who are able to stay home, take care of their families, and also work. When COVID came along, the factory, like many, had to be shut down. And this woman, working with her bank, found a way to continue to pay the salaries of employees who would otherwise have not received that income. So to augment any support they were getting in other ways, the bank stepped in. That's what a values bank does. There was a similar story. I spent a couple of years in Australia, and I know that Australia is a country that was faced, between the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020 with unprecedented bushfires, unprecedented drought. Well, I guess it was drought first, then bushfires, then incredible rainfall and COVID, and all happened in a compressed period of time. And during that time, many people are living with uncertainty. They're living with, we're going through psychosomatic stress and all of these things. A values-based bank at that point in time, based in a place where you were having terrible experience in lockdowns yourself in Melbourne. We were in Sydney frankly, living quite easily, while the state that my colleague was in here chose to handle it differently. So you had a lot of customers who were suffering, and again, the bank stepped in to make sure people had the right information that they needed to avail themselves of the services that they needed, and went beyond and really touched base with everyone who was a client, and went beyond the call of duty, even in their own period of difficulty. So these are the sort of leading edge things that values-based banks do. That said, I would also like to just point out that all of this conversation in the sort of ecosphere, and with everyone wanting to be a green bank or a values-based bank in some way, talking about ESG and other things, to your earlier point, it's not just what you do, it's what you don't do. So if you're taking a department that is focused on something that is values oriented, and 20% of your foundation grants go to something that's values oriented, those are all really great. But if on the other side you're doing things that are hurting the environment, or hurting people, oppressing people, or not preserving rights, then of course there's a problem. That said, we welcome everyone coming into this conversation. We welcome everyone taking steps to be more values aligned. And it's our job to remain authentic, to continue to be incredibly transparent, and to move ahead of the curve wherever it is in the current state. So that's why for us it was really important to set net zero goals or 5 years ahead of what was being expected. It's important for us to be involved in PCAP. It's important for us to think about workers' rights. It's important for us to be on the leading edge when our country started doing things that made decisions that were going to affect a women's reproductive rights, or when our banking environment generally wasn't doing all that it could do to stop violence that's happening on our rails and in our system, facilitated through our system. It's incumbent upon us to be the one that steps out, and happy to have everyone else follow.
That's fantastic, Priscilla. The examples you gave, and I love that you spoke about examples of your colleagues right here and knowing them so well, but it was really just showing up and listening to people. It wasn't about selling another financial product or putting another loan down. It was giving information to people, listening to what they really needed. That's what the bank led with at those moments of crisis, and both of the examples that you gave, really powerful. And as you were describing in going on to the commentary about how everyone's using this language now, we have one colleague in our group who talks about values-based banking as a lighthouse, and that we do want we welcome people embracing the concepts underpinning what we're doing. We embrace that, we welcome them. But also this community really puts itself out as a lighthouse, transparently, with the spotlight that comes on a lighthouse, that we're accountable, but we want to show, share, hopefully encourage, but we welcome a growing movement of actors. So thank you for that. And Damien, how about you? How do you think about differentiation of values-based banks?
Thanks, Laurie. I think one of the things I can add to the current conversation, when I reflect on the question around others leaning into our space, that this is a live conversation within our business as well. And one of the things I always reflect on with our people is around ambition. And I think the idea is that to be more ambitious in terms of how we lift the bar around responsible or values-based banking, and how we can evidence and be transparent around that. So one of the things that we did when we looked at how do we set a net zero target was what the mainstream banks were doing in our domestic market, but also what other banks within the Global Alliance, and Triodos Bank and Van City and now Bank Australia have all set net zero targets for 2035. Now that's super ambitious. We don't have all of the solutions, but we know that mainstream banks can't set similar targets, and we need to be ahead of the curve. And I think setting such an ambitious target also realises the scope and the complexity that we need to act now. We can't wait for another 10 or 15 years before we start taking action on climate. And it's really critical. We survey our customers. We ask them what are the issues that they would like to see us respond to in terms of using the business of banking to address people and planet. And climate is out there by a country mile. So we know that that's the #1 issue. So I think for us about being creative, being ambitious, raising the bar around, action on climate keeps us ahead of the curve in terms of what our competitors, if they're starting to compete on purpose and compete on values, then, what do we do to stay ahead?
Fantastic. And I love that, raising of the bar. And as you were using the word ambition and ambitious, what you were really doing was putting it in the context of to what end? Ambition to what end? And again, I would at least play back to you that I think that's a differentiation of values-based banking, because you're very clear. It's not ambition to be recognized by the institution. It's ambition in the results of the work of the bank in meeting the needs of people and planet, and pushing further to see how far you can go in that regard. And you've all demonstrated that, and you continue to do so every day, but your remarks really highlighted that. And I would also say there's been some conversation we've been having in the community, and we hear this again in the newspapers. Regulators are worried about impact washing and greenwashing, and the way in which you each described those points of differentiation, I would at least suggest is a great response to concerns about greenwashing and impact washing. It is the specificity, the clarity, the accountability of the actions that actually is the best response. Priscilla,
Can I
please.
just add one thing? I like what you were just, where you were just going, because it really is about who you are in service to. And as a B Corp in our context, we are making it very clear, we're very transparent about the fact that we're not just in service to a shareholder, we're in service to all of our constituents. And I'm really thrilled that in our case, our constituents, our customers, are people who share these values. Again, they're in 6 segments that we not only take deposits from, we lend to, and we partner with on many things, including policy positions and other things. But I think it's who you are in service to that distinguishes everybody in this room.
I think that is beautifully said. Thank you for that. Fantastic. So now I want to shift and ask a little bit of forward-looking 2 questions as we're moving towards the end of our time together, but we have time, so don't rush in your responses. The first one is for people who are listening and watching. What would be a suggestion you could make to them, not necessarily as a banker, but as somebody who's interested in values-based banking, who may work at a bank, may not work at a bank, certainly they're living in community wherever they happen to be, but we know we need more of this, right? We know yes, there's a growing community, it's fantastic. We need more. We need more finance to change to be able to meet the needs across the globe. So do you have a suggestion, 1 or 2 things that somebody could do, an action step in the near term?
Yeah,
Damien.
I think for me, clearly consumers have agency. They can make choices about where they bank, and aligning your values with your banking institution and moving to a values-based bank wherever you are around the world is going to be hugely impactful. And I think the idea that values-based banks are typically smaller organizations, so close to their communities, they're grounded in the real economy. I think that's really important to the resilience and the viability of the organizations. But it's really important that while small is beautiful, scale is impactful. And consumers having that agency to move to a values-based bank, they can help build scale and impact.
Excellent, great suggestion, thank you. And the quote that Damien just shared is a quote from the founder of BRAC, Sir Hussain, who's been a source of inspiration throughout our time together. And it is a great quote. I'm so glad you brought it into the conversation. Selim, how about you? What is a suggestion you might have for an individual or somebody watching, listening to this conversation? Well, what can I do?
Well, actually, I was going to say something pretty similar to what Damien said. It's every consumer has a choice. What they have to recognize us in our individual capacities is that my choice matters. What I do with my financials, my finances, my money, where I get it from, where I put it, can influence a lot around me as well. It can influence, it can make an impact on the environment, on society in general. So I think as a consumer, we should use that strength or whatever you want to call it, that capacity in the right way. So next time, for example, when I buy a piece of clothing, I would want to actually think about what company am I buying this from? Not just the quality of the fabric or the beautiful design, but I think if you're going to be socially responsible, you would want a consumer to think before he made that step, he or she, and before that procurement activity happened. Is this a company that I want to sponsor or support or encourage, or is that one a different one? I think that choice has to, that the action has to follow now, and people across the world, particularly people who are educated and understand and who do have a choice, must make the rational choice.
I think it's great. Again, your use of the word choice, and that brings up one of that consistent theme of being intentional. You can act, you have options here. And I think sometimes people don't always think about where their money is. We have also another colleague who talks about where your money is spending the night. Your money's not sleeping, it's spending the night, it's doing things inside a bank, and being thoughtful about that. And making an intentional choice. And I do a lot of work in impact investing. And I think even impact investors who think they're very values aligned, and many of them are absolutely in pursuit of that with their equity investments and their debt investments, but they don't think about where their banking relationships are always. And so I think it's a great reminder. Priscilla, anything you'd like to add? Something that a person could take on as an action step?
Look, I think what both my colleagues said is perfect. It's so well said. The most important thing you can do is make sure that with those things you have control over, you are acting in a responsible way. I do think responsibility goes beyond when we think about social responsibility, the E comes to mind quite often. I think it also goes to the S and the G. So when you say, where is that garment? Who is the company that makes that garment? You're also talking not only about what they're doing with climate, what they're doing with the environment, but you're also talking about whether or not that company employs people fairly. You're talking about whether or not that employer goes beyond the transaction of, simply paying a paycheck to their employees. Do they care about the well-being of their employees? So it is in everything we do, and we have so much power that we abdicate when we don't do it.
Oh, I think that's so well said. We often we don't think we have the power. We don't use our power, and our voice is often our power. And what you're also making me think of, Priscilla, is the power of the question. Ask the question, ask the follow-up question, probe a little bit. Don't just look on the surface. And I'm really pleased that you highlighted also the S and the G of our ESG triad, because I think people, and you talked about it with the survey, climate is very much front of mind. We all understand why it is, particularly across the globe. The social and the governance dimensions of how a business is operating are deeply important. And you have to sometimes look a little bit harder to understand that and discover that. So the power of the question. Thank you very much. Super. All right, our last question as we wrap up is let's imagine we're reunited in Bangladesh in let's say 3 years time. In 3 years time, we have a reunion here in Bangladesh and with our global audience. What would you like to be able to say about values-based banking at that time? Damien?
Oh, great. Thank you. So a question without notice. For me, I think what I'd love to see is, fast forward 3 years, that the alliance itself has increased in terms of the number of participants, right around the globe. And I think, that's really important, because that's how we'll change finance, by having a greater voice and a greater impact in the communities where we operate. There will be increasing challenges, but the resilience of values-based banks are really important. I think not just about serving the communities where we operate, but also helping to increase sustainable development and protect the environment whilst we, help to lift and develop the people that not only work within our organisations, but that are customers and the other stakeholders within our organisations.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you for that. Selim, how about you? We're reunited 3 years with you here in Bangladesh. What would you like to be able to say?
For a start, I think we've already won a big success in the sense that we have so many mainstream institutions now trying to, or banks, financial institutions, trying to, get onto the value-based bandwagon. That itself suggests that the concept is quite clear to the public and that they care. Otherwise, these other institutions would not have tried to portray themselves as a socially responsible or an environmentally friendly bank, financial institution, etc. So I think for a start, we can clap ourselves on the back and say we've done a reasonable job over the last decade for that to have happened. But going forward, I agree with Damien, numbers, we need more members and we need to, I go back to 2009 when the movement started and Sir Abed actually suggested that we must target to influence 1 billion lives. So I'm not exactly sure how many lives we are impacting today with the 70 odd members of the GABV, but I would like to see us get pretty close to that billion number.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what I hear you both saying, and you've reflected this also in your comments and certainly the composition of the community to date, it's growth with diversity, because we do touch across many geographies. There are more that we can be reaching in community. You've all talked about that, the local contextualization. So really powerful. Thank you. And Priscilla, how about you?
Again, my colleagues have said it perfectly. I would say that it's really about driving impact and knowing that it's there. So when you look around the room, a very crowded room at that point, you can hardly get in because there's so many authentic values-based banks in the room, that when you look around that room, you can actually say that collectively and independently, we have really had impact. We've really forced change. And that may be legislative change, that may be environment, it may be social, it could be in any dimension of social responsibility that we all care about. And in our various countries, it will be something very different, but that we can actually look around the room and feel extremely proud that enormous change has occurred in areas that we're incredibly passionate about because we are here.
That's fantastic. And so first of all, I love the vision of the standing room only at a very large venue in Bangladesh. So standing room only as we're gathering together, both in person and in our virtual connections around the globe. So I love that image that it's a crowded community. And then making sure that we really feel that we can point to, we can shine that spotlight on the specificity, the tangibility of the impact that we are having in our own institutions and as a broader community, benefiting from the sharing, the learnings that you've all been doing so beautifully and then talking about in today's conversation. Because as we started at the beginning, and we just know where we all sit in the world, there's a lot to be attended to. Finance isn't the single solution. It's an enabler. We are stewards of money. Money can meet people's needs in specific ways, particularly when it's combined with the other types of services and interventions you've also been referencing in the examples that you gave. But we need more values-based bankers on the planet. And so you really, I think you've given an invitation and an encouragement to people who might be considering it, people who are at different stages in their journey. And so I just want to thank you so much for kicking off this session today and getting people banking on Values Day, getting it off on the right start. And all of you who are listening, we invite you to go to the website, www.bankingonvaluesday.com. Banking on Values Day. That is a tongue twister a little bit. Bankingonvaluesday.com. The website is there. There's lots to do and to engage in, and we'll resume certainly next year, but there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. And so please join me in thanking these three tremendous leaders of values-based banks, Damien, Priscilla, Selim. Thank you so much.